Okay, I need to talk about this because I've seen the Discord over Twitter and on YouTube over the past couple of weeks, and it needs to be addressed because I'm tired of hearing it. I've been hearing it for months, and it's a very dumb argument, especially within this community, that I don't know why it started. I don't know why it's so accepted the way it is, but it needs to stop. So, what I'm going to talk about here today is why RWBY Volume 5 unquestionably is the most important volume of RWBY character wise. Story wise, you can make any opinion you want, but character wise and dialogue wise, it is the most important volume, and I'm going to explain why. Here, I have a list of notes that I took recently when I rewatched Volume 5 before Volume 7 came out. Now, there's a lot of information that Volume 7 gave that plays with things that Volume 5 did that I will talk about, but for the most part, Volume 5 will not be touched. It will not be changed. None of that. So let me explain. What do I mean by character-wise in terms of importance? I'll explain. Number one, the dialogue between the characters, especially in regards to like growth and backstory and character arcs and them improving and them recovering from the fall of Beacon. Volume 5 did the most groundwork by far for every single character by far. Let me start with the main four: RWBY, Weiss, Blake, and Yang. With RWBY, at the end of Volume 3, she had no direction, she had no purpose, she didn't know what she had to do, where she was going, what the goal was. All she knew was what Crow told her, which was, with Osmond gone and Ironwood in Atlas, the only person he can talk to at the moment is Leonardo Lionheart from Haven Academy, which was in Mistral. So RWBY asks Crow, "What can I do?" And he says, "What you can do is you can rest," because this was right after the whole Cinder v Pura battle, so she was in no position to fight. And then we see at the end of Volume 3 that RWBY, Jean, Nora, and Ren all set out for Anima to go to Mistral. Now, Volume 4, we see RWBY starting to come into her own, starting to become a leader, starting to become more herself, rather than like someone who she thought she had to be, which at the beginning, I feel like RWBY as a character is the only character who's had a motivation that's been straightforward from the get-go, which was she just wanted to protect people, and that's all she's been trying to do since day one. That's her whole thing. And in Volume 5, we see that happening. She, like, they arrive in Mistral, they speak to Lionheart, and that's when Oscar joins the picture and he starts explaining more of Oz's backstory. And granted, out of the main four, RWBY is the weakest in Volume 5 because she doesn't do much in terms of action. She's more of a, let's just say, inspiration machine with her speeches, as people have called them, with her conversation with Oscar and how, like, she lost her friends at Beacon, but she doesn't let that stop her. She still knows that there are things that they have to do, that they have to keep going, otherwise they're not going to get anything done. There's no time to sit down and really contextualize everything because there's this big looming shadow over them that they have to take care of, so they can't really stop and be like, okay, yeah, let's talk about this, like they don't have the option to do that. Now with Weiss is probably the best character out of 4 and 5 that they treated the best, which is in Volume 4. Actually, at the end of Volume 3, she went back to Atlas with Jacques. In Volume 4, we get to see what life is like in the Schnee Manor. Whitley does not give a shit about Weiss or Winter. We've known about this for a while. She even said this prior to Volume 4. We see how Jacques treats her, which is not really like a daughter, more like a commodity, more like someone who's like, hey, look, this is a symbol of like, I'm doing good, like just like a power play kind of thing, not a person, more like a political pawn, I guess it would be the correct word. But yeah. And then Willow is not present until Volume 7, and that's a whole other can of worms, specifically. And then at the end of Volume 4, we see that she makes the decision to leave. She leaves, and she goes to Anima. She stows away on the cargo ship, and she single-handedly fights a swarm of hornets, of the Hornet Grims. And you know, the plane ends up crashing, Raven ends up kidnapping her, and all this other thing. Also, the most important thing with Weiss is her connection to Yang's story in Volume 5, which we'll get to in a second. But the conversation between Weiss and Yang in Chapter 8 of Volume 5, I think it's Chapter 8. Yeah, Chapter 8 of Volume 5 is one of the most well done and cathartic conversations in the show, period. It is. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to quote it when I get to Yang, but that conversation is so important. If you don't remember that conversation, go back and look at Volume 5. I don't care if you watch the whole season. Look at episodes 8, 9, 10, and 14 specifically for what I'm talking about in terms of character interaction, character growth, backstory, them becoming their own people, coming into their own, pushing past what they thought they were versus who they're going to become later in Volume 6 and Volume 7. Because Volume 5 is very important. Now with Blake is interesting for the sole reason that Blake is the only person who was not involved in the main conflict until the very end of Volume 5. And here's how I'll explain it. Blake, at the end of Volume 3, took Yang to Vale after she lost her arm to make sure that she got medical attention, and to make sure that everybody else that was in Beacon got out safely, and make sure that they got medical attention. After all that, she ran. She hopped on the boat and went to Menagerie. Of course, we know that Sun followed her, and then Sun and Blake went off and did their own thing in Menagerie. What we learned about Blake in Volume 4 is incredibly important because people always like to bring up the Faunus racism subplot as if like it's redundant or doesn't make any sense or they feel like it wasn't done correctly. Let me explain something to you. Let me refresh your memory as to where Blake comes from and what Menagerie is. After the Great War in Remnant, the King of Vale, as a compromise to get the Faunus to stop fighting humans, gave them the continent of Menagerie. And at surface level, you might look at that and say, that's great. They have a whole continent to themselves. Why is that a problem? It's a problem when you realize the geography of Menagerie. And this is how Blake describes it. When they arrive at the village, this is what Blake says. Blake says, this is Kuokuana. Like, this is, like, this is a village where any Faunus can feel welcome. And then Sun asks, is it always cramped? And she replies, when you take an entire species and try to put them on an island that's 2/3 desert, yeah, it can get kind of cramped. And then Sun says, you have that much extra room, why waste it? A little desert never hurt anybody. And she says, it's not like the desert in Vacuo, Sun. The wildlife here is more dangerous than most other regions. And then Sun asks, so they gave us a tiny island in the corner of Remnant to try to shut us up. And Blake says that about sums it up, yeah. And then Sun says, jerks. Which is true. They gave them a tiny amount of land for an entire species, because that's gonna work out great. I mean, obviously, the way she explained it was that um, we came together and made a place where any fauns could feel welcome. It's like, but this island, this town, will always be a reminder that we're not equal. We're just second class citizens. It's like, and then Sun remarks, is like, it's beautiful. Why would anybody? I take it all back. Why would anybody want to leave? And then she says, that's not the point, son. We ask to be equal, to be treated just like everybody else. And then she says, this island, this town, is just a reminder that we're not equal. And then in volume 5, we get Blake's backstory with Ilya more. If you watch Blake's character short, you know that before Sienna Khan became the leader of the White Fang, it was Gira. It was Blake's father that was in charge of it. And then once Menagerie came into the picture, people asked Gira to be the chieftain, to be in charge of Menagerie. So he decided to step down and get away from the White Fang, and he put Sienna Khan in charge because she was like his lieutenant at the time, and she proved to be headstrong and motivated, and she knew what she was doing in terms of faunist problems. She could be trusted. And obviously we saw how that turned out, where Sienna Khan at the beginning tried to do things peacefully and ended up reverting back to her old violent ways and using fear to get what they wanted instead of compassion, like they were originally trying to do. And then we see that Blake ends up going to the Battle of Haven and ends up confronting Adam with everybody from Menagerie. And then that leads into her final conversation, Volume 6. But we're specifically talking about Volume 5 right now, so we're not going to get into that. However, Blake's story is very important because when she arrives in Menagerie, she specifically tells Sun, I am not here to fight. I'm not trying to fight anybody. I am here to relax, to reflect, and to spend time with my family. That was it. It wasn't until Ilya started becoming a problem and Corsic and Finnick presented themselves where she finally made the choice to be like, okay, I need to do things. And then, because like she had the idea in her head that like maybe if she can get through to Ilya, she wouldn't have to go out of her way to like push back against them. It wasn't until Sun got injured that she started opening up more about like how she actually felt after the fall of Beacon, which was, and this is the most important conversation that Blake had in Volume 5 and on Volume 4 with Sun, which is this. When Sun is laying on the couch, bandaged up, his shoulders hurting, he sits up, looks around, looks at Blake and says, Blake, what happened? And she says, this is why. This is why, son. This is why I had to leave them behind. And then Sun tries to say something, but he says, be quiet. Do you think I like being alone? Every day I think about them. RWBY, Weiss, Yang, they were my friends. I love them more than I ever thought I could love anybody. And I hope they hate me for leaving. And that line right there shows that the entire time she was there, she wasn't driven by like, oh, I need to run away, I can't handle this on my own. She was driven by pure self-hatred. She fully believed that her friends would be better off if they never saw her again. If she just removed herself from the picture, they would never have to deal with all of her bullshit, which was not true at all. Not even remotely true. It just was not true at all. And then we see that in Volume 5, after the conversation with Ilya, that she makes up her mind and says, you know what? No more running, no more hiding. If we're going to fight this, we're going to fight it. We have to go straight into it, and we can't half-ass this. We have to do it if we're going to do it. Now, Yang Xiaolong. The character of Yang, by far, is the one that upsets me the most because people treat Yang as if her story never happened. And it's so frustrating every single time I hear somebody talking about Yang and they completely gloss over the amount of growth she had between volume 3 and volume 5. It is astronomical the amount of growth she had, and people act like it never happened. And it's super disrespectful to the writers who wrote her story the way they did, and it's super disingenuous to treat Yang as if she's exactly the same as she was in volume 3, which is not the case. It's not even remotely true at all. And to say that, you either haven't rewatched older volumes in a while, which perfectly fine, maybe go back and rewatch it, refresh yourself, or B, you're being willfully ignorant, in which case, don't do that shit. If you have an opinion based off of a wrong fact, it is no longer an opinion. You are just spouting ignorance for the sake of ignorance. That is not helpful to anyone. Let me get into Yang, because Yang is by far my favorite character in terms of where she started and where she is currently. They are night and day. They are not the same person. I mean, granted, yes, they are the same physical person, but emotionally, physically, mentally, they are not the same at all. They're not. And to say that is disingenuous. And I'm going to explain why. In volume 1, actually, not even volume 1, the yellow trailer, right off the bat, how was Yang introduced into the show? She was hot-headed, she was overconfident, and she came off as a bit of an asshole. I won't lie. Volume 1 happened, and Volume 1 happened, and she was still hot-headed and she was still overconfident, but she still actively cared for people. If you think back to the final, I think it's 3 episodes of Volume 1, where Blake reveals that she's a faunus, the entire time that that's happening, the only 2 people who are like consistently correcting Weiss on her bullshit are RWBY and Yang. Yang specifically, because she keeps hounding Weiss, saying like, dude, do you not care if she's gone or she's missing or anything? And then Weiss continues with her whole, like, I can't believe she was a faunus. And Yang is like, that doesn't matter. What matters is that she's safe and that she can talk to us and she can explain it. All the other emotions can come afterwards, but let's just make sure that she's safe first, which I love. And then in Volume 2, we see the same thing. Volume 2, she starts becoming even more overconfident, especially during episodes 4, 5, and 6, where they're doing the whole espionage mission looking into Roman Torchwick. She goes to Junior's bar again, and she walks in, and she's like overconfident. She's like, hey, did you miss me? And then like she starts demanding things of Junior, even though like realistically Junior does not owe you anything since you walked in there, questioned him, beat up all his thugs, and then destroyed his building. I wouldn't want to help you either. That's just me though. I don't know. And then in Volume 3, we saw that like built up overconfidence like boil over in the Vital tournament when she was fighting Flint and Neon, where she thought like her usual fighting style of like going head first, gung-ho, fists on fire would work, and it didn't. It ended up costing her a lot, especially when, okay, obviously the Mercury and Yang thing was staged, so that's not a real example, but regardless, Volume 1 through 3, we knew Yang as like, she knows what she wants, and she's not afraid to ask for it. She came across as somebody who like had this cloud of confidence over them. Like she knew what she wanted and she wasn't afraid to ask for it. That kind of thing. Now here's where her story gets interesting. And this is the aspect of Yang that people forget about for some reason, even though it's right in front of your face. even today, even in volume 7, it's right in front of your face if you look at it. The biggest aspect of Yang's story, and something that people leave out all the time, is there's something missing on her body. She doesn't. Her arm is gone, dude. Did you forget this? Did you forget that her arm is gone? Yes, her arm being cut off. Now, that 1 second, that one decision to jump into battle and try to save Blake is what changed Yang instantly. As soon as that happened, something clicked in Yang, and she became a completely different person. And I'm going to explain why. Yang lost her arm to protect Blake. Let's look at this from Yang's perspective. You jumped into battle to save your friend, and you lost your arm. You pass out, you get medical attention, you wake up in Vale, and the friend you protected is nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be found. And then this random person you've known for less time than your friend tells you that she ran away. Obviously, you're going to feel some emotions. You're going to feel a little betrayed, a little angry. Understandable. And then at the end of volume 3, RWBY walks into the room. Yang's sitting there sulking, which rightfully so. You deserve it. And she just explains, like, it's all gone. The school, Penny, Pyrrha. It's like, and then RWBY asks what happened. It's like, and then it's like, everybody's scared. The Yang says everybody's scared. RWBY's like, what do you mean? It's like, nobody outside of Vale knows what happened here. Like, the last thing that people saw on TV were Atlas soldiers attacking innocent civilians and Grim being released into the school. And then RWBY asks where are Weiss and Blake. It's like Weiss's father came for her. It's like he felt that it would be safer in Atlas. And then RWBY's about to ask for Blake, and she said and Blake ran. She screamed, but I'm not gonna scream right now. It's Anyway, she said Blake ran. Sun saw her go. Like, she just ran. And then RWBY asks why. It's like, I don't know and I don't care. It's like, and then RWBY says there has to be a reason, and then Yang says no, there doesn't. Sometimes bad things just happen. It's like, what are we gonna do now? It's like Yang says, you can do what you want, I'm gonna lie here. And then we see RWBY leave and go to Haven. Volume 4 and Volume 5 Yang, especially Volume 4, is very, very, very important for one reason. Yang doesn't deny what happens. She doesn't go out of her way to say, like, oh no, I'm perfectly fine, like, everything's perfectly okay. She fully accepts immediately that every aspect of her life is gone. Her normalcy is gone. Her family is broken again. Her friends that she thought she could rely on are all gone, adrift in the wind somewhere. She has no idea where they are. And the only person she could rely on at that moment in Volume 4 is Tai Yang. And Tai Yang does his absolute best to convince her that, like, yes, this horrible thing happened to you, but that does not have to be the end-all be-all. You can move past this. You can do what you want to do and still accept that this is what it is now. I don't remember the number episode, but we get that interaction between Oobleck, Port, and Tai Yang in the kitchen when she asks, when Port asks, why haven't you tried on the arm that Ironwood sent you yet? And she says, I don't know, I'm scared. Like, people keep, like, I know people want to help me and I appreciate it, but everybody keeps talking about me getting back to normal. But this is normal now. And then Tai Yang says, normal is what you make of it. And Yang says, what is that supposed to mean? Like, am I supposed to just pretend that nothing happened? I lost a part of me. A piece of me is gone and it's never coming back. And Taiyang says, you know what? You're right. It's not coming back. But that doesn't have to stop you from being who you want to be. You're Yang Xiaolong, my sunny little dragon. You can do anything you set your mind to. It's like, so whenever you're ready to stop moping and get back out there, I'll be there for you. And then we see at the end of that episode, she finally tries on the arm, and then we see they're starting to spar. She's starting to get back into it. She's easing into it. And then we have this conversation between Yang and Taiyang is very important. Listen to this dialogue very, very carefully. You ready? And this proves that if you call volume 4, 5, and 6 Yang the same as volume 3 Yang, you are incorrect. This conversation right here. Listen very carefully. I reviewed your footage from the Vital Tournament. Yang. Oh, let me guess. I was sloppy. Taiyang. It's like, no, you were predictable. And stubborn, and maybe a little boneheaded. Like, did you know that you used your semblance to win every match after the qualifiers? Yang. And then Yang asks, so what? How is me using my semblance different from anybody else using theirs? Taiyang. Because not everybody's semblance is essentially a temper tantrum. Like, you're strong. Like, your semblance is strong. You can take damage and dish it out twice as hard, but that doesn't make you invincible. What happens if they're stronger? What happens if you miss? Then you're just weak and tired. And then they move on and say, you remind me so much of your, like, I see so much of your mother in you. And then Yang says, I'm sorry I remind you of her. He says, don't be. I'm proud of how much I see of her in you, but I'm glad I don't see all of her in you. Raven's flaws are what tore our team apart. You and your mother both think that the quickest way through an obstacle, my bad. You and your mother think that the greatest way to fix an obstacle is through it. But if you take another look, you notice there's another way around it. That conversation right there, and she takes that advice to heart. That conversation proves that the way she was doing things, whether it was intentional or not, was harmful for her in the long run. She couldn't keep doing that forever. She had to look at things differently, be more mindful, be more tactful. She couldn't just punch her way through every problem she was going to face, because eventually she was going to run out of steam, which is exactly what she does in Volume 5. In Volume 5, we see her go to Anima and start looking for Raven. She comes across that bandit at the little pit stop place, and she doesn't immediately go towards violence. She doesn't immediately start like, dude, leave me alone, boom, punch him in the face. She gives him 3 warnings. It's like, I'm good. And then he keeps going. It's like, not too slim, not too bulky, just right. Yeah, I got it. Like I said, I'm good. And then he does it again. And he tries to touch her hair, and that is when she snaps, punches him in the face. And then you even see it in the fight between the bandits and Yang. She's not immediately like, just punch everybody. She's tactful. She's bouncing around. She's doing combos. She's like bobbing and weaving. She's not the same person. She's obviously taken what Taiyang says and saying like, okay, don't go through something, move around it. Try to be more well-rounded. Don't just be a wall and like bulldoze your way through it. That sort of thing. And then the 2 interactions that I really want to talk about with Yang are, the 3 interactions that I want to talk about with Yang in Volume 5 that are very, 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 very important in case you forgot them. Yang, Weiss, and Raven in the tent. Weiss and Yang in the Haven house in the Mistral house before they go to Haven. And then the Yang and Raven conversation in the vault. First, let's start with the tent. The tent Raven explains Salem, the Grimm, and what her mission was at Beacon. She Raven explains her and Crow did not go to Beacon to learn to be huntsmen. They went there to learn to kill huntsmen. That was their mission for the tribe. And it wasn't until afterwards when Crow started working with Ozpin that Crow said, I'm not doing that anymore. You can keep doing that. I'm done. I'm out. No, not for me. And then Raven says something about her friends. I forget the exact line of dialogue, but Raven says something about no, she says something about Ty. She says like your father's such a fool, and she breaks the table and says, "Don't you have no right to talk about my father, at all." And then later, the Weiss and Yang conversation at the Mistral house. This conversation is extremely important. This was right after, in the morning, when Weiss comes out, gives them their coffee. They start talking about, oh, I can't believe we're in Mistral. And then Ruby's like, no, Weiss is like, really? That's what you can't believe? It's like, yeah, and all the other magic and stuff, but you know what I mean. It's like, and then Ruby says, I just wish Blake was here with us. Like, Yang is like, well, yeah, well, she made her choice. And then Weiss asks, what is that supposed to mean? Then Yang says, hey, she could have been here with us if she just stuck around. So it's okay though. Like, we'll be fine. Then Ruby asks, don't you want her here? Yang responds, why would I want her here? And then Ruby says, are you still mad at her for leaving? Yang says, oh, whatever gave you that idea, Ruby? No, I'm great. And then Weiss says, okay, calm down. And then Yang yells, don't tell me to calm down. And then eyes flash red. And she realizes that she's getting angry and she walks away. Later on in the episode, we see her in the room looking at the picture of Team RWBY and reminiscing. Knock on the door. Like, yeah. Opens the door. She thinks it's Ruby. Ruby, I really don't want to talk about it. Can you just leave me alone for a bit? Looks up. It's Weiss. It's like, oh, hey, Weiss. Hey, did you need something? Weiss walks in, sits on the bed. Doesn't say anything. It's like I know she's our teammate, but I'm not just gonna forgive her. Like, I'm sorry. I just don't know if you know what it's like to be left. You had a giant family, dinners to like recitals to perform at, dinners to attend. I had none of that. Like, my mom left me. Ruby's mom left too. Like Ty was always busy with school, and Ruby couldn't even walk yet. So I had to pick up the pieces. I had to keep the family together. And then Yang says, Weiss, if you have something to say, then say it. And then Yang, and then Weiss finally explains Willow, the character of Willow, and more Jock, I guess. Which actually, yeah, Willow and Jock, and their dynamic while she was growing up at the Schnee Manor. This was their dynamic. When I was 10, my father finally admitted to my mom that the only reason he married her was for the family name. It was actually on my birthday. He missed the big dinner. She got mad. He finally snapped. Like, thinking back, I think I finally knew too. Thinking back, I think she knew. I think deep down I knew too. But hearing him say it finally pushed her over the edge. At first, it was separate lunches and dinners, opposite balconies at my recitals. A glass of wine here, a glass of wine there. Then it was no dinners, no recitals, a bottle of wine here, and, well, you get it. And then Yang says, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have assumed. And then Weiss, you're right though. I don't know loneliness like you do. I have my own version. And I bet Blake has her own version too. And Yang says, she doesn't have to be alone though. I was here for her. We all were. Like she chose to leave us. And then Weiss asks, why do you think she did that? The entire time that Blake was at Beacon, she was afraid to open. She tried to keep her past separated from us. She tried to protect us. But eventually those walls she put up came down. And the moment they did, the one thing she was scared of actually happened. The universe proved her right. And then Yang said, nobody blamed her for anything though. If she would have talked to us, she would have known that. How could I be there for her if she doesn't let me? And this line right here, this line that I'm about to say, proves that Yang changed dramatically in the like 6 month span between volumes 3 and 5, which is, what if I needed her here for me? And she starts crying. Like, that one scene says everything you need to know about Yang. Yang is somebody who has had people leave her, whether intentional or not, her entire life. Raven left when she was a baby. Summer Rose left when she was a kid. Taiyang was present, but not as much as he could have been. And then when she finally thought she found a family of her own and somebody she could trust, she ran away. So in her mind, Yang felt extremely hurt and extremely betrayed by all of the actions Blake did in volumes 4 and 5. Whether that was intentional or not, that is up to the characters to decide. But that one scene tells you everything you need to know. That Yang is somebody who puts on a face of confidence all the time. She puts on this facade of like, yeah, I've got everything together. I totally know what I'm doing. But deep down, she has no idea what the fuck she's doing. She's just as lost as anybody else. And that's not her fault. That is she's a victim of circumstance, if anything. And that's something that people don't understand about her character. And it's upsetting to hear that people act like Yang is just like this overconfident, obsessed jerk that doesn't know what the hell she's talking about half the time, when clearly she's more nuanced than just, oh, big strong girl, flame hair. Like, that's not all she is. She has layers, just like every other character has. So to take volume 5 and act like it didn't happen is bullshit, because you are actively ruining the character for yourself, because you are leaving out a giant chunk of what makes them the way they are now in volume 7 and more in volume 8 whenever that comes out. You have to understand that even if you didn't enjoy volumes 4 and 5, they are integral to the story. What volume 4 and 5 did for the characters is very, very important. You cannot ignore it because you didn't enjoy it, or because it was boring, or whatever the hell the case may be for you particular. You have to go back, you have to look at volume 5, ignore the story bits, ignore the world building, ignore all of that. Go back. I challenge all of you looking at this video right now, anybody who was a critic of volume 5 or volume 4, cause I know some people don't like volume 4 either. If you're critical of volumes 4 and 5, go back to those volumes and watch them again. They have movies now. You can watch them on YouTube. They are there. Go back and watch them. Don't pay attention to the world building or anything like that. Look at the character interactions specifically, and you will have a greater understanding as to why the characters do what they do now in volume 7 and what they probably are going to do later in volume 8. So please, please stop shitting on volume 5 to fit your opinion. It's not justifiable to cut out a giant portion of character backstory just to justify your opinion that these characters are not good, or whatever the hell your opinion is. Because let me tell you something. If you watch this entire video and still believe that Blake is like this bland character with no nuance, or if you think Yang has no depth other than she's a fighter and she's good with her gauntlets, you are being disingenuous. You are being ignorant. Completely. This is not something that I pulled out of thin air. This is not something that I made up on the spot. This is something that is present in the show itself if you bothered to watch it with any level of nuance other than it's boring, skip. Please, go back, watch volume 4, watch volume 5 specifically. Volume 5 specifically. Look at the dialogue in Volume 5 and come back and tell me that Volume 5 is still the worst written volume of the show. Granted, Volume 5 is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I understand this. But to look at the scenes that I spoke about in this video and say that Volume 5 is boring or Volume 5 is not important because it doesn't add to the show, you are wrong. You are being ignorant. Go watch them again, and I guarantee you all the arguments you've been making for months about Volume 5 make zero sense. You are only saying that because after Volume 6 came out and was infinitely better than Volume 5, you think it's cool to shit on Volume 5 and act like it didn't happen, when in reality, Volume 5 might be the most important volume of the show after Volume 7. So please, if you watched this entire video, great. Thank you. I appreciate you for watching. It means that you are a fan of the show and you care about understanding some nuance that might have been lost on you the first time you saw it, or if you haven't watched older volumes in a while, maybe this gives you motivation to go and watch it for yourself and see what I'm talking about. Pick up on little things that you might have missed or that you've forgotten about because it's been so long. Please, stop shitting on Volume 5. It's a good volume. It is a great volume, if anything. Granted, is it the best volume? No. Is it the worst volume, though? No, it isn't. By any stretch of the imagination. It's not. At all. If anything, the worst volume of the show goes to Volume 1, and that's only because it had no bearing on the overall arc of the show, because they were just starting to figure out where they were going. So in terms of like lore and world building, Volume 1 has no substance at all. Like 8 episodes out of the 16 episode volume that is Volume 1 is based solely around the teams and like creating Team RWBY and Team Juniper. That was it. And then even then, like the whole world lore thing doesn't happen until Blake reveals that she's the Faunus. So yes, if you take anything away from this video, the 4 members of Team RWBY are very complex, are very layered, very nuanced, if you bothered to look for it. If you go back to the show, I know it's been a while. I know we're focused on Volume 6 and 7 at the moment, and eventually Volume 8, if it comes out later this year. I understand. But go back. Look at the older volumes. They add a lot to the show that is going over your head because you either forgot about it or you're choosing to forget about it. Don't do that. You are doing yourself a disservice, and you are putting out information that is ignorant to fit your narrative. Stop doing it. Great. Thank you. If you're a fan of RWBY, I'm going to be making more videos like this. I'm probably going to talk about Juniper at some point too, because Juniper has its own can of worms that people like to talk about too much, and it's annoying. Juniper is also a very complex set of characters that people like to sweep under the rug because of decisions made in Volumes 4 and 5. Fandom. I love you all, but you're exhausting sometimes. That's all I'm saying. Okay, if you made it this far into the video with all my rambling, good job to you, because this is a very long video. And yes, be on the lookout. You know what? Yeah, no, I am going to do that. I'm going to make a video on Juniper at some point, because Juniper is a whole other thing that needs to be talked about, and it's not talked about nearly enough. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, thumbs up. Also, stay tuned for the Juniper video that's going to come out at some point. Also, to all the critics out there that are probably not going to watch this whole video, but if you've made it to this video, to the end of this video, and you're watching this right now, then please, if you are a critic of RWBY, I have a video for you too. It's going to come at some point, because I truly believe there is not a single valid critic of RWBY in existence. Period. I said what I said. Bye.